In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why De'Aaron Fox's trade request from the Sacramento Kings complicates moving Brandon Ingram in a very negative way. But does that also mean Domantas Sabonis is available? It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Friday, and we got a lot of trade talk, whether it's Brandon Ingram, Domantas Sabonis, De'Aaron Fox, CJ McCollum, even some Herb Jones trade talk in here too. And we'll wrap up talking about Zion, explaining why he's not playing back-to-backs right now. So thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. So let's dive into this one. The big news of the week is that De'Aaron Fox basically wants out of Sacramento. And while he's represented by Clutch, this is not really the most aggressive move I've ever seen from them. And I don't know if Fox is going to get moved by the trade deadline. It doesn't sound like he's making this nasty just yet. And he'll more likely be moved in the offseason. And frankly, some of the reporting out there per Jake Fisher has been he'd actually prefer to wait to be moved in the offseason when more assets are available. Teams get access to more draft capital, future draft picks that can get moved than right now. But we have a week to go before the trade deadline, and basically every team in the league, including the Pelicans, is calling about De'Aaron Fox and to a lesser extent Domantas Sabonis. More on Sabonis in the next segment. But what I want to focus on here is De'Aaron Fox and that holding up the trade market, delaying any potential deal or even derailing a potential deal for Brandon Ingram and another team. Fox is and will be in high demand. The trade market was already a little bit held up because of Jimmy Butler. Not a ton, but a little bit. But this is now what it complicates. It's long rumored, without him directly saying it, and he won't directly say it, that San Antonio is Fox's preferred destination. A superstar player, an all-NBA guy wanting to get traded to San Antonio. Think about that for a second. But that's the Victor Wembanyama effect. De'Aaron Fox, by the way, doesn't drink, doesn't really party. He just stays in his house with his family playing video games. So going to a small market like that maybe is kind of what he wants. He doesn't really want to go to an LA, a Miami, a New York. So wants to go to the San Antonio Spurs. It's an open secret right now. It's been a bit of an open secret. About a week ago, the Spurs reached out to the Pelicans about Brandon Ingram. Didn't get anywhere. That was just more like, hey, what would it take? Not making an offer or anything like that. But here's the thing. If San Antonio thinks they can get De'Aaron Fox, they're not going to trade for Brandon Ingram. And that's what I mean by holding up the trade market. There's another team out there that potentially wants to get Brandon Ingram. They likely would rather get De'Aaron Fox instead. And so now you run into a situation where okay, all of these teams are going to wait to find out what happens with De'Aaron Fox. If they don't get him, maybe then they pivot to Brandon Ingram. But I don't know if Fox is going to get moved before the deadline. He certainly will be this offseason if he's not before the deadline. And honestly, I think the Sacramento Kings are going to wait because they're going to get much better offers or at least be able to drive the price up on the San Antonio Spurs in the offseason with other teams kicking the tires on Fox and making offers. So if they're in no rush to trade for him now, all of those teams are going to wait for De'Aaron Fox. They're not going to say, well, we can't get him now, let's go get Brandon Ingram. They're not going to give up assets that they would use to get Brandon Ingram or clog their salary cap up with things that don't help them get De'Aaron Fox. And so thus, it's going to hold up any trade for Brandon Ingram and maybe make it more likely that he's on the team after the February 6th NBA trade deadline. And that's what I've been thinking for a while was I really don't know if they're going to be able to find a deal for Brandon Ingram. And if he is on the team after, does he ever play again? The Everydayers know, we talked about that last week, that he has maybe played his final game already for the New Orleans Pelicans back on December 7th. That's what this Fox News does. If Fox wasn't like, hey, I want to get moved, and he's not forcing his way out. It's just, hey, I'm not going to re-sign, so it might be in your best interest to trade me. Otherwise, I'll walk eventually, and you'll get nothing in return. And the longer you wait, as we've seen with Brandon Ingram, those offers go down. So maybe you should consider doing this now. It's almost like he's doing the Sacramento Kings a favor. And so would the Spurs maybe have traded for Brandon Ingram had this not happened? Quite possibly. I wouldn't say it's likely, but I think it was in the realm of realistic possibility here. Now, though, definitely not. Take the San Antonio Spurs out of this. The other thing that we've heard this week, which I find very interesting, is that the Houston Rockets, another team we thought should be really interested in De'Aaron Fox, and Fox is from Houston, so it's kind of a homecoming for him. The Houston Rockets, all the reporting is that they're not doing anything. They're not going to go out and try and get De'Aaron Fox right now, because they like their team. They're young. They're right in the top 2-3 of the Western Conference. As I'm recording the show, they're up 6 on the Memphis Grizzlies. They don't have Alperen Sengun. Memphis doesn't have Ja Morant in this one, but still kind of an impressive score for them here. They don't want to rock the boat too much. They don't want to go all in too soon, let alone with a player on a big deal like a Brandon Ingram or De'Aaron Fox that just doesn't vibe. But if they're not going after Fox, right, like you're not making a move for Brandon Ingram at that point in time. That just doesn't seem like something that they would end up wanting to do here. You don't want the better player because you want to stick with your young guys. You're not going to rock all of that for Brandon Ingram. And so this again says, complicates the trade market in the sense that it takes a potential suitor for Ingram out. I think it's going to be tough to find a deal for him. A deal could get done. Obviously, talks are really going to heat up in the next 3-4 days before you hit Thursday. But I ultimately don't see a trade where, at least right now, where Brandon Ingram leaves New Orleans. That might change literally by the minute, but that's kind of where things look to be standing right now. Not ideal for the Pelicans, and the De'Aaron Fox stuff really complicates it. Would New Orleans make a move for Fox? I think potentially, but given that he's got a destination in mind, and given that he's represented by Clutch, that maybe that's a little bit too much of a risk for the New Orleans Pelicans to take, and it would take a whole lot. You'd be looking at a Brandon Ingram, a Herb Jones, somebody else, and a ton of draft picks. And is that the right move? Then you're stuck with CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, and De'Aaron Fox, and how does that all work? Right? I don't think you're going to be able to get CJ and Herb Jones for De'Aaron Fox. I think it's going to take a whole lot more than that. That's worth keeping in mind. I might even take Trey Murphy, who's basically untouchable for the Pelicans right now. So I don't think De'Aaron Fox is a realistic option. But if they end up trading him, Sacramento does that mean they're kind of blowing it up? Should they then move Domantas Sabonis? And that makes a lot of sense. And Sabonis makes a lot of sense here in New Orleans. Let's look at what that could be. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worrying. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason. And don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. So let's keep talking about the De'Aaron Fox trade request and kind of the impacts that come on after that. The next thing would be, okay, if you can't get Fox, he's traded to San Antonio, let's say, for a package of like Devin Vassell, Stephen Castle, and a bunch of draft picks, whatever salary you need to make it work. Does then that mean they should trade Domantas Sabonis? You're going to take a big step back. The guys that they would be getting are good young players, but that's not going to help you win right now. And this is a move that if you do this step, it means, okay, Doug Christie's our new head coach. Let's put a young team out there and let's see what he can do with them. Sabonis, who will be 29 this season. Yeah, this season doesn't make a ton of sense as you get closer and closer to 30 for him. So would it make sense to trade Domantas Sabonis? And I think the answer could be yes. And when you think of bigs to pair next to Zion Williamson, and this piggybacks perfectly off of what we were talking about yesterday and like the day before that, Sabonis is an ideal center to put next to Zion Williamson. This is someone who is just exceptionally good. In Sacramento, he's averaged for his career there, so 3 years and some change, almost 4 years, 19.6 points per game, 7.4 assists, 13.3 rebounds while shooting 40.6% from three, unlimited three-point attempts. It's 1.3. You would not call him a court spacer, but he's definitely capable of shooting the three ball and making the three ball and stretching the court, and he would obviously need to lean into that a little bit more. When you look at Misi, who is young, hitting a rookie wall, and will keep improving, I still feel good about his future. He doesn't have the rebounding numbers that Sabonis does. Sabonis has an incredibly high defensive rebounding rate. His entire time in Sacramento, his defensive rebounding rate has been 31.3. That means he's grabbing 31.3 of all available defensive rebounds when he's out there on the court. That is an exceptionally high number. That's really good. Jonas Valanciunas was in the 30s. Being above 30, being above 25 really means you're an elite defensive rebounder. Sabonis has done that every year other than one, his rookie year. So this is someone who can be very, very effective on defensive rebounding. After the Pelicans just gave up 16 offensive boards and 32 second chance points, this is the type of player that they need. He's a good defender. He's not a rim protector, but he's a good defender. He has mobility to defend on the perimeter, exactly what the Pelicans want. And if you were to bring him in, it could mean that Misi slides to a more of a role player role, and I think that could be better, him coming off the bench. Sabonis makes a lot of money. This is tough to try and figure out how to do, but there are ways to do it. He makes $40.5 million this year, $43.6 the year after that, $46.7, and then basically $50 million in the final year of his deal, and $27.28. Obviously, he's a very, very good player here, and it would be smart to try and trade for him. I think, if they were really content to kind of move on from this era there in Sacramento, and as we've seen with Brandon Ingram, and something that I've long said, the best time to trade a player is like the first year of their extension. This is the first year of his extension, of that new contract. It kicked in for Sabonis this year. His value will never be higher than it is right now. I also don't love that because what's the point of signing guys if it's like, well, we're just going to trade you in a year, but this is the NBA world that we live in right now. Could you craft a deal that something like Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, whatever other young player the Sacramento Kings want? And I mean, look, let's throw Jordan Hawkins in there, right? Like that makes a ton of sense. Basically not Trey Murphy. So it's Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Jordan Hawkins for Domantas Sabonis and Trey Lyles. Trey Lyles is an $8 million expiring deal here. What this does for the Pelicans is it shaves $5 million off the salary cap, but it gives, and then you would need a ton of picks. You'd need probably minimum 3 first-round picks in something like this. Sends Brandon Ingram there. That's a player they can at least figure out what they want to do with. It gives them that young defensive guy in Herb Jones, another young guy in Jordan Hawkins. Look, if you needed to include someone like, as much as it pains me to say it, Jose Alvarado in this deal, you probably need to do that too. In all of those picks, it gives them more picks. They're going to be flush with them after a De'Aaron Fox trade too. Herb Jones, who is a very tradable contract, should you want to in the future, or just a good dude to have around. Jordan Hawkins, so a young player that's intriguing, even if we're not the highest on him right now. And then Brandon Ingram. I don't know if that's a deal that Sacramento would do. You know, the idea of Brandon Ingram and DeMar DeRozan on the same team is weird to me at the very least. But that's the basis of a deal. Look, you could take out Brandon Ingram. You could put in CJ. You could put in DeJounte Murray if you wanted. You can figure it all out. Those pieces are kind of interchangeable in my opinion. I think Murray is not a guy that they would look to move. But then you'd be going into next season with, say, DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Domantas Sabonis. And that seems like a very, very good team to me. A very, very good team to me. So that would be the dream. I would be more in favor of adding Sabonis onto this roster than I would be De'Aaron Fox. And I don't think Fox is going to come here in the first place. The other really great thing about Sabonis is he has that long contract that's 3 more years after this season. So you have full team control. You're not worried about him bolting or anything like that. Hence why his value is going to be the highest right now compared to any other year. That probably makes it a little bit tougher for you to try and trade for him and bring him in. But maybe that's a move that New Orleans should really look to do. The one thing that would concern me about this, when you look at the draft picks, is you probably need to include your pick this year. You know, maybe you can get it lottery protected for the top 5. But if you don't, and it ends up like 1, 2, or 3, and look, Sabonis would work. It would work around Zion Williamson. That makes a lot of sense. I still think that pick is so valuable with how good the top 4, top 5 of this draft is shaping up to be that I really don't know if I could pull the trigger on that. Especially when you're giving up Herb Jones and some of the other stuff that you would have to give up in this sort of trade. I'm curious what you think about that. If you had to include, call it unprotected, the unprotected draft pick for the Pelicans this year, would you include that in this deal for Domantas Sabonis? Say it's Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, and the unprotected draft pick. You can make everything else work for Domantas Sabonis and Trey Lyles. Gets the Pelicans under the luxury tax this year. That's an important thing to keep in mind too. Maybe that's worth the unprotected pick, but yeah, that would scare me, right? Like that should scare you a little bit with how special this draft might be, and you know, the chance for Cooper Flagg, you know, Ace Bailey, Harper, any of those guys are guys that I would really very much like on this team. Could you pull the trigger on that deal? Let me know in the comments down below. But it's going to be an interesting week here as we head towards the trade deadline. I guarantee you, as I've been, there will be a trade for the New Orleans Pelicans in some capacity, even if it's just ducking the luxury tax. You can bank on that one as much as anything else, because for the Pelicans, there's like $20-something million at stake to figure out how to make that work. So coming up next, Zion Williamson had an interesting quote about not playing back-to-backs. It mirrors something that I've told you for a while here. I want to read that to you and kind of tell you what's going on here and what it says about the Pelicans. And it says a lot, actually. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, the Chiefs, the Eagles, and endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or my personal favorite, even betting on the coin toss, tails never fails. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature is great, so you can kind of stay involved no matter what's going on, what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. And knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Pelicans play the Boston Celtics in the Smoothie King Center tonight. Boston's a 10.5-point favorite. New Orleans played them tough couple weeks ago in Boston. I don't know if this one's going to go as well here. I might take Boston minus 10.5 on that one, but $5, you win that bet, $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans, I'm going to sneeze here, your first listen today. And every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And go check out Locked On Saints. Make them your second listen today. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, breaking down everything black and gold. New QB, maybe? That's really a thing. I'm kind of excited about that. Go check it out over at Locked On Saints. Also, he'll tell you who the next head coach of the Saints is going to be. So, let's move on from a little bit of trade talk to something that Zion Williamson said. And he said this after practice today, and Will Guillory had the quote here. Zion Williamson on playing back-to-backs, quote, "Let me make this clear to everyone out there. If I could play in back-to-backs, I would. Physically, yes, I can, but I work for the Pelicans. They have decided that based off the numbers, it's not too smart to do that right now. If that's what they feel, I'm rocking with them on that," end quote. This is exactly what I've told y'all is kind of going on here. This has nothing to do with Zion Williamson being lazy, being out of shape, or anything like that whatsoever. He can play back-to-backs. I told you that a couple of weeks ago when they haven't been having him do this. It's about recovery and the risk of re-injury. And if the Pelicans were in playoff contention this year, I have no doubt that Zion would be playing back-to-backs. He can play it right now. Physically, he can do it. It's not like he's winded, he's out of shape or anything like that. He could do it. You do get a little bit weaker. You know, he says it there, and I've told you this on this show for the everydayers. He says they've decided that based off the numbers, it's not smart to do that right now. The numbers are not the record, though there's a little bit of that. More on that in a second here. It's a little bit of tanking. But they're also realizing that right now his body is still somewhat recovering from that hamstring injury. It's not as full strength. Doesn't mean he doesn't have the cardio to be able to do that. It's full strength. They have so much technology there that goes into this. The Kings kind of brought this into the league, a couple of years ago when they were super healthy, and the league's kind of copied them on this. If you go to a game early, you'll see these kind of like boards out there, and the players get on them, and it measures a bunch of things. When you jump, it measures the force you put on the ground. They have baseline numbers for these guys. If those force numbers, or whatever the numbers are, come in lower, then they're like, hold on, something's off. We might need to adjust this guy's minutes. He's a little bit tired. We got to keep him fresh. It could lead to injury. When you're fatigued, your body compensates. It can lead to further injuries. And that's not an ideal situation for this team. Right now, they are thinking about the future. They are thinking long term. And in a sense, protecting Zion Williamson from himself. This isn't coddling, in my opinion. This is them realizing this season is lost. Let's not do anything that jeopardizes the future. And frankly, that's smart, right? That's what we want them to be doing here with that, is thinking in that capacity. And they are. Now, it's going to cost them some games. I'm cool with that. A lot of y'all are. If you wanted to win, that's okay too. But if they're going to lose more games, they're going to protect Zion. To them, they're like, that's a win-win for us in this situation where we are today. And that's probably the way that they're viewing it. I think Zion is saying this to all the people that whenever he's out, you see it in Twitter and other places of like, what the heck? He's just lazy. He's a baby. I don't think it's any of that. Look, Zion deserves all of the criticism sent his way. He does. He knows that too, I think. But this is not one that's been his decision. This is the team. And the team is doing that because they're thinking long term, as they should be at this point. You have 30 games left or so. And you may as well just make the most of them and not jeopardize your future whatsoever. In fact, make it so that the future is going to be better. Look, we saw that video of Zion Williamson in the offseason with the tattoo and everything. He full-on dad bod. It wasn't great. I don't think at any point he should look like that. But if that came because of that hamstring injury that kept him on the shelf for a while, the Pelicans would like to avoid that so that he's capable of doing all of the right things all off season rather than just half of the off season or something like that. So if you can prevent an injury from happening, that is in the Pelicans' best interest, and that is what they're doing here. It means this season sucks even more. I get it. It's unfun. But they are thinking long term to make next season better. And at this point, I really can't fault them for doing that. It's tough running an organization. It's super tough running these teams and having to make that decision. They think about the fans when it comes to stuff. Of we want to make fans happy. That's what this is. It's entertainment. Y'all are paying money to go to this stuff. They want to make it worthwhile because if everyone stopped, that kind of sends this all, it doesn't work anymore, does it? So that's a big part of it. But they also do need to try and think about what is in the best interest of the franchise on the court. There's competing interests here. It's what, again, makes this very difficult when it comes to these things. But that's what Zion's saying here. I don't think this was him taking shots at the front office, at the organization, at the medical staff, anything like that. I think it was him just being like, yeah, lay off me. And that's a totally valid thing to do because, trust me, they hear a lot of that stuff. And I've been telling you, this isn't a Zion Williamson decision or anything like that whatsoever. In fact, the way that he said it does make it seem like he's like, okay, I'm cool with this. He said, if that's what they feel, I'm rocking with them on that. But I work for the Pelicans comes off a certain way, especially when you read it. But overall, if that's what they feel, I'm rocking with them on that. I think there's more trust here than people realize. And I don't think there's like a rift or anything between him and the organization. In fact, I do think that they're probably in a better spot than they've ever been in terms of that relationship. That means Zion's going to do everything you want him to do? No, but I think it's eliminated some of the distrust, the friction, all of those things between the two sides that definitely existed before. But I think you're seeing it look a little bit better right now and things be a little bit better between both sides when it comes to that. So that is somewhat encouraging. I don't view this as a bad quote, a damning quote on anybody or anything. I think it's just the explanation that I've understood that hopefully everyone else understands now going forward. So enjoy the game tonight in the Smoothie King Center, taking on the Boston Celtics. Try and get there early because the traffic and things and parking's even worse than it normally is. I will be there. We'll recap it on Monday. I'm looking forward to this game. I'm looking forward to talking with y'all more, and it's going to be a busy week with trade stuff. If anything breaks, of course, we will have a show here on Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be back with y'all next time.